Imagine a world where slaves became captains, where democracy existed before it was fashionable, where outcasts created their own republic. For 30 brutal years, pirates ruled the Caribbean seas. Not mindless criminals, but rebels who built the most democratic society of their time. Tonight, the true story of the Golden Age of Piracy, when freedom had a black flag and a terrible price. Let me take you back to the early 1700s to understand how ordinary sailors became the most feared pirates in history. Because these men didn't start as criminals. They started as victims of a system so brutal that piracy seemed like freedom. Picture the Atlantic Ocean in 1715. Three major European powers, England, Spain, and France, have just finished another exhausting war. The War of Spanish Succession lasted over a decade, and during that time, these empires hired thousands of sailors and privateers. Privateers were legal pirates, essentially, ship captains with government permission to attack enemy vessels. They were heroes during wartime, celebrated for bringing wealth and damaging enemies. But then, peace came. Suddenly, thousands of experienced sailors had no work. The navies discharged them. The privateering commissions were revoked. These men, who knew nothing but the sea, who had spent years fighting and sailing, found themselves unemployed, penniless, stranded in port cities with no prospects. Meanwhile, the merchant marine, the civilian shipping industry, was brutal beyond modern comprehension. If you couldn't find privateer work, your option was joining a merchant crew. And merchant ship conditions were closer to slavery than employment. Imagine you're a sailor on a merchant vessel in 1715. You work 18-hour days in brutal conditions. You sleep in a cramped, filthy hold with dozens of other men. The food is hardtack, rock-hard biscuits crawling with weevils, and salted meat so old it's nearly rotten. Water is stored in barrels where it quickly becomes brackish and full of algae. You drink it anyway, because the alternative is dying of thirst. The captain has absolute authority. He can beat you for minor infractions. He can withhold food as punishment. He can have you whipped until your back is shredded. There's no appeal, no justice, no protection. The captain's word is law, and if you complain, you're labeled a troublemaker and might be thrown overboard or hanged for mutiny. Your wages, if you ever see them, are a pittance. Captains and ship owners take the lion's share of profits, while sailors get barely enough to survive. Many sailors were in perpetual debt to the ship, required to buy their supplies from the captain's stores at inflated prices. It was economic slavery with a thin veneer of legality. Disease was rampant. Scurvy, caused by vitamin C deficiency, would make your teeth fall out, your gums bleed, your old wounds reopen. Typhus and dysentery spread rapidly in the cramped, unsanitary conditions. Your chances of dying on a merchant voyage were disturbingly high, and nobody would care. Sailors were disposable, easily replaced at every port. The class divide was stark and absolute. Captains came from wealthy families, lived in comfortable cabins, ate well, and grew rich. Common sailors were treated as subhuman, worked to exhaustion, paid almost nothing, beaten for sport. The merchant marine was a hierarchy more rigid than any medieval feudal system. Now imagine you're one of these sailors, and you hear stories. Stories about other sailors who said, "No more," who seized their ships, threw off their brutal captains, and turned pirate. You hear that pirate ships are different, that pirates elect their captains. that they share plunder equally, that no man can beat another without consequence, that they live free, bound by codes they chose, not imposed by distant aristocrats. You hear about places like Nassau in the Bahamas, where pirates have created their own society. A place with no kings, no nobles, no system telling you that your birth determines your worth. A place where a skilled sailor, regardless of background, can become a captain. Where black sailors and white sailors work as equals. Where democracy, real democracy, functions daily. The decision to turn pirate wasn't about becoming a criminal. It was about refusing to be a slave. It was about choosing freedom, even if that freedom came with a noose as its likely end. Mutinies would start slowly. A few sailors would whisper to trusted friends, "We could take this ship. We outnumber the officers. We have the skills to sail it ourselves." The conspiracy would grow, recruit more men, plan the moment. Usually it happened at night or during a storm, when confusion provided cover. The mutineers would seize the weapons locker, overpower the officers, and take control of the ship. The captain and officers who had brutalized them would be given a choice: join as equals, or take a small boat and leave. Some captains were simply killed, especially those known for particular cruelty. But many were set adrift in a boat with provisions, given a chance to survive. Then came the moment of transformation. The sailors would gather on deck and make a decision together: turn pirate, or try to join another merchant ship and endure the same brutal system. The vote was usually unanimous. They raised a new flag, the Jolly Roger, the black flag with skull and crossbones that would become the most feared symbol on the seas. They would draw up a code, the Pirate Code, or Articles of Agreement. These were the rules they would live by, agreed upon democratically, signed by every man. The codes varied between ships, but the basic principles were consistent. Equal votes in major decisions, fair division of plunder, compensation for injuries, and, most importantly, no man could claim authority he hadn't been given by the crew. They elected officers. The captain would be chosen for his sailing skill, his courage, and his ability to lead, but he could be voted out if he failed. The quartermaster would be elected to represent the crew's interests, to ensure fair treatment, to act as a check on the captain's power. These weren't inherited positions or appointments by wealthy owners. These were democratic elections among equals. This was the birth of a pirate. Not a criminal choosing evil, but a worker choosing freedom over slavery. Not a monster, but a rebel against a system that treated him as disposable. The Golden Age of Piracy was as much a labor rebellion as it was criminal enterprise. These men were saying no to a world that valued them less than the cargo they transported. And they were willing to die for that freedom. Every pirate knew the penalty for piracy was death by hanging. The authorities showed no mercy. But they chose it anyway, because a short life of freedom was better than a long life of slavery. That's not criminality, that's revolution. The years 1715 to 1725 would be the peak, the golden age when pirates controlled vast stretches of the Caribbean and Atlantic. Nassau became a pirate republic, with over 1,000 pirates calling it home. Ships with black flags terrorized merchant vessels, captured incredible wealth, and created a society unlike anything that existed in the civilized world. They were outlaws, yes, criminals by every legal definition, but they were also something else, freedom fighters who rejected a brutal system and built something different, however imperfect and violent. Understanding why they became pirates is understanding how desperate the alternative was, how inhuman the merchant marine had become, how radical democracy seemed in an age of absolute monarchy. Now, let's talk about what made pirate ships different from every other vessel on the ocean. The Pirate Code.
Because pirates weren't anarchists living without rules. They were democrats living by rules they chose for themselves. And that's a crucial distinction.
The Jolly Roger, the black flag with skull and crossbones, wasn't just a symbol. It was a weapon. Pirates understood psychological warfare. When a merchant ship saw that black flag rising up a pursuing vessel's mast, the message was clear. Surrender now, and you'll live. Resist, and we'll show no mercy. Different pirate captains had different flags. Blackbeard's flag showed a skeleton holding an hourglass and a spear pointed at a bleeding heart. Time is running out. Death is coming. Bartholomew Roberts had multiple flags, including one showing him standing on two skulls labeled a Barbadian's head and a Martiniquean's head. Revenge for those islands hunting him. Jack Rackham used crossed swords beneath a skull. Each flag was personal, a signature of terror. But the black flag was also an offer. It meant, we want your cargo, not your lives. Pirates preferred targets to surrender because fighting damaged ships, killed crew members they might recruit, and destroyed valuable cargo. The black flag was saying, give us your stuff and nobody gets hurt. If targets surrendered, pirates generally kept that promise. They'd take valuables, maybe some supplies, perhaps recruit willing crew members, then let the ship go. However, if a ship resisted, pirates would raise a red flag, the bloody flag, that meant no quarter given, no mercy shown. Everyone would die. This wasn't an idle threat. Pirates enforced it brutally to ensure future targets understood. Surrender to the black flag or die under the red. This psychological strategy worked remarkably well. Most merchant ships surrendered without fighting. Their sailors had no loyalty to the cargo or owners, weren't paid enough to risk their lives, and new pirates often treated captives better than merchant captains treated their own crew. Why fight for owners who treated you like dirt when surrender meant survival? But the Jolly Roger was more than terror tactics. It was a declaration of identity. Flying that flag meant you'd rejected civilization's rules, chosen to live outside the law, embraced freedom at the cost of becoming an outlaw. It was rebellion made visible, a middle finger to every king and empire that claimed the seas. Now, the Pirate Code, the Articles of Agreement. Every pirate ship had one, written specifically for that crew, voted on and signed by every man. These weren't suggestions. These were laws, strictly enforced, and violating them could mean death or marooning. Let me give you an example. Here are actual articles from Captain Bartholomew Roberts' crew, one of the most successful pirate operations. Article 1. Every man shall have an equal vote in affairs of moment. This means all major decisions, where to sail, whether to attack a target, whether to keep a captured ship, were decided democratically. The captain commanded during battle, but between battles, every man's vote counted equally. Article 2. Every man shall be called fairly in turn by the list on board of prizes, because over and above their proper share, they are allowed a shift of clothes. But if they defraud the company to the value of even $1 in plate, jewels, or money, they shall be marooned. This article ensured fair distribution of plunder. When a ship was captured, everyone got a share based on their role. The captain and quartermaster got larger shares, usually 1.5 to 2 shares, while common crew got 1 share. But even the captain's extra share was modest compared to merchant ships, where captains took the vast majority of profits. And the penalty for stealing from the common pot was severe: marooning, being left on a deserted island to die slowly. Article 3. None shall game for money, either with dice or cards. Gambling led to fights, grudges, inequality. Pirates earned their shares through collective effort and didn't want gambling to destroy the bonds between crew members. Article 4. The lights and candles should be put out at 8 at night, and if any of the crew desire to drink after that hour, they shall sit upon the open deck without lights. Fire was the greatest danger on wooden ships. This article reduced fire risk while allowing men to drink and socialize safely above deck. Article 5. Each man shall keep his piece, cutlass, and pistols at all times clean and ready for action. Weapons maintenance wasn't optional. Your weapon might save a crewmate's life in battle. Letting it rust or misfire could kill your friends. This was enforced religiously. Article 6. No boy or woman to be allowed amongst them. If any man shall be found seducing any of the latter sex and carrying her to sea in disguise, he shall suffer death. Women on ships were believed to cause jealousy and fighting. Some pirate ships did have women. We'll talk about Anne Bonny and Mary Read later. But they were exceptions, and they typically disguised themselves as men. Article 7. He that shall desert the ship or his quarters in time of battle shall be punished by death or marooning. Cowardice in battle threatened everyone. You had to stand with your crew. Running meant betraying them to death. Article 8. None shall strike another on board the ship, but every man's quarrel shall be ended on shore by sword or pistol. Fighting on ship endangered everyone. You could damage crucial equipment, start fires, create chaos that got everyone killed. If you had a dispute, you settled it on land through duel. This kept violence controlled and off the ship. Article 9. No man shall talk of breaking up their way of living till each has a share of 1,000 pounds. Every man who shall become a cripple or lose a limb in the service shall have 800 pieces of 8 from the common stock, and for lesser hurts proportionately. This is the world's first disability insurance. Lose a leg in battle? You get 800 pieces of 8, a fortune. Lose an arm? Proportionate compensation. This was revolutionary. Merchant ships and navies provided nothing if you were injured. Pirates took care of their own. Article 10. The captain and the quartermaster shall each receive 2 shares of a prize, the master gunner and boatswain 1 1/2 shares, all other officers 1 1/4, and private men 1 share each. Notice the distribution. The captain gets double, but it's still only double, not 10 times or 100 times like in legitimate shipping. This was remarkably egalitarian for the 18th century. These codes were enforced strictly. Pirates held trials for violations. The accused could defend himself, witnesses testified, and the crew voted on guilt and punishment. It was rough justice, but it was justice, more than most sailors got in the legitimate world. The quartermaster's role was crucial. He represented the crew's interests, managed the division of plunder, resolved disputes, and could overrule the captain outside of battle. The captain commanded in action, but the quartermaster ensured fairness. This system of checks and balances prevented tyranny remarkably effectively. Pirates also practiced religious tolerance unusual for their era. Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, Muslim, your religion didn't matter. Black, white, mixed race, your color didn't matter. Former slave or nobleman, your past didn't matter. What mattered was your skill, courage, and loyalty to the crew. Pirate ships were possibly the most racially and religiously diverse organizations in the 18th century Atlantic world. This wasn't idealism. This was pragmatism. When you're outlaws hunted by every navy, you need every capable man. You can't afford prejudice. A black sailor who knows how to navigate is more valuable than a white sailor who doesn't. A Jewish merchant's son who speaks multiple languages is invaluable. Pirates judged by merit because their survival depended on it. The pirate code represented something radical, a social contract chosen freely by equals, not imposed by authority. In an age of absolute monarchies, where kings ruled by divine right, where the church and nobility controlled everything, where birth determined destiny, pirates created societies where every man had a vote, where leaders were chosen by merit, where justice, however rough, was administered democratically. It couldn't last, of course. Such freedom threatened every power structure in existence. But for a brief, glorious moment, pirate ships were floating democracies. Black flags were symbols of liberty, and the pirate code was a declaration that free men could govern themselves. Let's talk about what daily life actually looked like for a pirate, because the reality was far from the romanticized version we see in movies. Life on the account, pirate slang for active piracy, was brutal, boring, terrifying, and occasionally exhilarating, usually all in the same week. First, the ship itself. Most pirate vessels were captured merchant ships or small naval vessels. Pirates preferred sloops and schooners, fast, maneuverable ships that could catch merchant vessels and outrun naval warships. A typical pirate sloop carried 75 to 150 crew members, far more than necessary to sail the ship. Why? Because you needed numbers for boarding actions and to replace casualties. The ship was crowded, filthy, and dangerous. Between 75 and 150 men lived in a space designed for maybe 30. You slept wherever you could find room, hammocks strung below deck, on deck in good weather, anywhere there was space. Privacy didn't exist. You lived pressed against your crewmates 24/7, breathing their air, smelling their unwashed bodies, hearing their snores and farts and fights. The smell was indescribable. Imagine months of unwashed men sweating in Caribbean heat. Add bilge water, the stagnant water collecting in the ship's bottom, which became a toxic soup of seawater, rotting food, rat feces, and general filth. Add the smoke from cooking fires and tobacco. Add salt water, tar, gunpowder. The stench was so overwhelming that visitors to pirate ships would vomit from the smell alone. Food was terrible. Hardtack, biscuits so hard you had to soak them in liquid to eat them, usually full of weevils. Salt pork or beef, preserved in brine until it was nearly leather. Dried peas and beans. When you captured a ship, you'd take fresh provisions, fruits, vegetables, better meat. But those would spoil quickly in the heat. Within days, you were back to hardtack and salt meat. Water was precious and scarce. Stored in wooden barrels, it would quickly become stagnant, full of algae and whatever microorganisms thrived in warm, still water. You'd drink it, despite the taste, because dehydration would kill you. Smart pirates mixed rum with the water. The alcohol killed some bacteria and made the taste bearable. This is where the pirate reputation for constant drinking comes from. They were actually trying to make their water safe to drink. Rum became central to pirate life. Every man got a daily ration, usually a quarter pint of straight rum or a pint of watered-down grog. This wasn't recreational. It was necessary for morale and health. Rum provided calories,
killed waterborne bacteria, and gave men something to look forward to in an otherwise miserable existence. But pirates also drank heavily after successful raids, spending days in drunken celebration before sobering up for the next hunt. Disease was the biggest killer. Scurvy was inevitable on long voyages. Your body needs vitamin C, found in fresh fruits and vegetables. Without it, your connective tissue breaks down. Your gums swell and bleed. Your teeth fall out. Old wounds reopen. You become weak, then bedridden, then dead. Pirates tried to combat scurvy by raiding coastal towns for citrus fruits, but it still killed more pirates than combat ever did. Dysentery, bloody diarrhea from contaminated food or water, would sweep through crews, leaving men weak, dehydrated, and dying. Yellow fever, malaria, typhus, all thrived in Caribbean conditions. If you survived a year as a pirate, you were lucky. Most died within months, usually from disease rather than violence. The boredom was crushing. Weeks might pass without seeing another ship. You'd sail day after day through empty ocean, nothing happening, nothing to do. You'd repair sails, maintain weapons, practice shooting and sword fighting. But there's only so much of that. Mostly you'd sit around, tell stories, play dice or cards despite the prohibition, drink, sleep, and try to pass the time. Entertainment was crucial for morale. Pirates sang, work songs to coordinate tasks, shanties for entertainment, bawdy songs about women and drinking. They told stories, inventing increasingly outrageous tales about their adventures. They gambled when officers weren't watching. They played musical instruments if any were aboard. Anything to break the monotony. When wind died, ships could be becalmed for days or weeks. The sails would hang limp, the ship wouldn't move, and you'd sit under the brutal Caribbean sun, rationing water, watching the horizon for any hint of wind. Men would go mad from the heat and boredom. Some would jump overboard, preferring drowning to the endless waiting. Storms were terrifying. Caribbean hurricanes could appear suddenly, with winds strong enough to shred sails and snap masts. Waves towered over the ship, threatening to capsize or swamp you. Everyone would work frantically, reefing sails, manning pumps to keep the ship from sinking, lashing everything down. Ships would be lost with all hands, disappearing into storms and never seen again. But then, maybe once a month, maybe less, you'd spot a sail on the horizon, potential prey, and everything would change. The captain and quartermaster would assess the target through telescopes. Too big and well-armed, you'd avoid it. But a lone merchant vessel, sitting low in the water with valuable cargo? Perfect. The hunt would begin. You'd approach flying false colors, a friendly nation's flag, to get close without raising alarm. Pirates kept collections of flags for exactly this purpose. As you closed distance, everyone would prepare for action. Weapons checked and loaded, boarding axes and grappling hooks ready. The crew tense, adrenaline building. At the last moment, down came the false flag. Up went the Jolly Roger. Sometimes targets would surrender immediately, relieved they'd only face pirates who wanted cargo rather than naval vessels that might impress them into service. Other times, targets would fight. Combat was brutal and quick. The pirate ship would try to get alongside, shoot away the target's rigging to prevent escape, then board. Men would swing across on ropes or use grappling hooks to pull ships together. Then it became hand-to-hand fighting on slippery, rolling decks. Pirates preferred cutlasses, short, heavy swords perfect for close-quarters combat. Also pistols, but 18th century pistols were single-shot and unreliable. You'd fire once, then use the pistol as a club or switch to blades. The fighting was chaotic, violent, personal. You'd see your friends killed. You'd kill strangers up close. The deck would be slick with blood. If the target surrendered, the violence stopped immediately. Pirates wanted cargo, not massacre. They'd secure prisoners, search the ship for valuables, and decide what to do with the vessel. Sometimes they'd take it as a prize. Sometimes they'd transfer cargo and sink it. Sometimes they'd let it go with minimal damage. Prisoners were usually treated well. Pirates knew that treating captives humanely encouraged future targets to surrender rather than fight. Cruelty to prisoners would spread as rumors, making future raids bloodier. Smart pirates were pragmatic. Better to have a reputation for mercy that made people surrender than a reputation for savagery that made them fight to the death.
Captured sailors were often offered a choice: join the pirates or be left on their ship. Many joined willingly, seeing pirate life as better than merchant service. Some joined under pressure, not quite forced, but strongly encouraged. And a few refused and were let go, usually with their personal belongings intact. After a successful raid, there'd be celebration. The plunder would be divided according to the code. Men would drink, sing, boast about the battle. For a few days, life was good. You had money, rum, maybe some better food from the captured ship. You'd celebrate surviving another raid. Then, back to the routine. Sailing empty seas, looking for the next target, dealing with disease and boredom, and the constant danger of being hunted by naval vessels. This was life on the account. Brief moments of excitement and horror, separated by long stretches of tedium. Always aware that capture meant the noose. Always free in a way few people in that era experienced. Always doomed, because society wanted you dead. Now let me tell you about one of the most remarkable social experiments in history, the Pirate Republic of Nassau. Because, for a few glorious years, pirates controlled an entire island and created a society that was revolutionary for its time. Nassau is in the Bahamas, about 200 miles from Florida. In the early 1700s, it was technically British territory, but the British had basically abandoned it. A 1703 Spanish-French raid had destroyed the settlement, and Britain didn't bother rebuilding. The island was left with a few ruined buildings, a natural harbor, and no government authority whatsoever. Pirates discovered it around 1715, and it was perfect. The harbor could hold dozens of ships. The location was ideal, close to major shipping lanes, but isolated enough to avoid immediate naval retaliation. The island had fresh water and food, and crucially, there was no one there to stop them. Pirates started gathering in Nassau. First dozens, then hundreds, eventually over 1,000. They'd raid, then return to Nassau to divide plunder, celebrate, repair ships, and rest. Nassau became a pirate haven, the capital of an outlaw nation that shouldn't have existed, but did. By 1716, Nassau was effectively an independent pirate republic. No governor, no laws except what pirates agreed upon, no authority except what emerged from the community itself. It was anarchy, but it was also something more. A functioning, stateless society built by outlaws. The harbor would be full of pirate ships, sloops, schooners, captured merchant vessels, all flying various versions of the Jolly Roger. On shore, a town of sorts grew up. Tents and lean-tos at first, then more permanent structures salvaged from wrecks or built new. Taverns, lots of taverns, where pirates would drink, gamble, fight, and socialize. Brothels, where prostitutes serviced a clientele with money to spend and no future to save for. Markets, where pirates sold stolen goods to merchants who didn't ask questions.
The population was diverse beyond anything else in the Atlantic world. English, French, Spanish, Dutch, African, Native American. Pirates came from everywhere. Former slaves worked alongside former noblemen. Black pirates and white pirates drank together, fought together, died together. Religious and racial barriers that were absolute everywhere else simply didn't exist in Nassau. Women were relatively rare but present. Some were prostitutes who came to service the pirate trade. Some were merchants selling supplies. And a few were pirates themselves, though usually disguised as men. Anne Bonny and Mary Read, whom we'll discuss later, spent time in Nassau. In this lawless place, gender norms were slightly more flexible than elsewhere, though still restrictive. Life in Nassau was wild, loud, and violent. Imagine 1,000 armed, drinking men with no law enforcement and a culture that celebrated violence and freedom. Fights were constant. Duels were regular. People died over insults, gambling debts, or just because someone was drunk and angry. But there was also community. These men trusted each other in ways impossible in civilized society. They'd fought together, risked their lives together. Bonds formed that transcended the violence. The economy was fascinating. Pirates would bring stolen cargo, sugar, tobacco, cloth, manufactured goods, Spanish silver, and sell it to merchants from British American colonies. These merchants would pay a fraction of legitimate prices, but still make huge profits reselling in Boston, New York, or Charleston. Colonial governors knew about this trade, often took bribes to ignore it, and sometimes participated directly. The pirate economy was integrated into the broader Atlantic economy, just illegally. Pirates would spend money as fast as they got it. There was no point saving when you might hang tomorrow. They'd buy rum, food, clothes, weapons, time with prostitutes, anything that provided immediate gratification. The phrase, "spend like a sailor," understates it. Pirates spent like men who knew they were doomed and wanted to enjoy themselves first. Some tried to establish order. Benjamin Hornigold, an experienced pirate, became something like an unofficial leader. He wasn't a governor, pirates wouldn't accept that, but he was respected enough that his opinions carried weight. He tried to prevent the worst excesses, mediate disputes, organize defenses. But his authority was limited. Pirates accepted leadership in battle, but bristled at government in peacetime. The Pirate Republic had an ideology, even if it wasn't written down. Freedom from tyranny, equality among men, democratic decision-making, fair distribution of wealth. These principles attracted not just criminals, but genuine idealists, men who saw piracy as rebellion against aristocracy, monarchy, and the brutal class system that dominated the 18th century. There were attempts at formal governance. At one point, pirates elected a governor of sorts, though his power was minimal and depended entirely on the crew's consent. This wasn't top-down government, but bottom-up organization emerging from collective need. Life in Nassau was also pragmatic. Ships needed repairs, careening, where you'd beach the ship, scrape barnacles off the hull, patch holes, replace damaged wood. Pirates became skilled at ship maintenance out of necessity. They'd hunt wild pigs on the island for fresh meat, they'd fish, they'd maintain gardens for vegetables to combat scurvy. The place wasn't just a party, it was a functioning maritime community. But Nassau's days were numbered. The British Empire wasn't going to tolerate an independent pirate nation in the middle of major shipping lanes. Pirates were costing merchants fortunes, disrupting trade, and embarrassing the Royal Navy. Something had to be done. In 1718, the British appointed Woodes Rogers as governor of the Bahamas with a mission: end pirate control of Nassau. Rogers was a former privateer himself, a tough, experienced sailor who understood pirates. He came with a combination of carrot and stick. a royal pardon for pirates who surrendered, and overwhelming force for those who didn't. Rogers sailed into Nassau harbor with a small fleet of naval vessels and hundreds of soldiers. He offered the pardon, renounce piracy, accept the king's authority, and receive forgiveness for past crimes, or refuse and face annihilation. The pirates split. Some, exhausted and wanting to retire with their plunder intact, accepted the pardon. Hundreds of pirates took the king's mercy, swore oaths of loyalty, and became legitimate citizens. Benjamin Hornigold, who'd led the pirates, switched sides and became a pirate hunter working for Rogers. Others refused. Blackbeard, Charles Vane, Jack Rackham, and several hundred hardcore pirates rejected the pardon. They fled Nassau rather than submit. Some sailed to other Caribbean islands, some tried to establish new havens.
A few went to the Indian Ocean or the West African coast. But they were hunted relentlessly. The Pirate Republic of Nassau lasted barely 3 years, from 1715 to 1718. But in that brief time, it demonstrated something radical. People could organize society without kings, nobles, or formal government. That equals could govern themselves. That democracy could work, even among outcasts and criminals. Nassau wasn't perfect. It was violent, chaotic, ultimately unsustainable. But it was also something genuinely new. A society built on principles that wouldn't become mainstream for another century. Democratic governance, racial equality, distribution of wealth, personal freedom. Pirates created these things not from ideology, but from pragmatic necessity. But they created them nonetheless. When Rogers took control, Nassau became a normal British colony, governed by appointed officials, subject to British law, structured by class and race. The wild freedom of the pirate years was over, but the memory remained, and the legend grew. For those brief years, Nassau had been the freest place on earth, a republic of outlaws that proved people could govern themselves, if given the chance. Let's talk about how pirates actually fought, because their tactics were sophisticated, their weapons specific, and their approach to warfare fundamentally different from naval combat. Pirates didn't want fair fights. They wanted overwhelming advantages. The goal wasn't glorious battle. It was successful theft with minimal casualties. Every pirate killed was a loss to the crew's strength. Every pirate injured meant paying disability compensation. Fighting was expensive and dangerous, so pirates avoided it when possible. The preferred tactic was psychological warfare. That's where the Jolly Roger was crucial. You'd approach flying false colors, getting close to your target. Then suddenly, you'd strike the false flag and raise the black flag. The message was immediate. We're pirates. We outnumber you. We're armed and dangerous. And we want your cargo, not your lives. Surrender now. Most targets surrendered. Why wouldn't they? Merchant sailors weren't paid enough to fight pirates. They had no personal stake in the cargo. Their officers might be brutal. Surrendering to pirates often meant better treatment than what they were getting on their own ship. So when the black flag went up, they'd strike their colors, accept capture, and hope for the best. This is why pirates preferred reputation over actual violence. A reputation for keeping promises, surrender and live, made future raids easier. If everyone knew pirates would spare prisoners, targets would surrender rather than fight. Pirates who betrayed this expectation and killed prisoners anyway found their next raids bloodier, because word spread and people would resist to the death. But if a target resisted, pirates would escalate. They'd raise the red flag, the bloody flag, or no quarter flag. This meant everyone dies. No prisoners, no mercy. This wasn't an empty threat. Pirates would follow through to ensure the message was clear. Resist,
and you'll watch your friends die, then die yourself. The approach to combat was methodical. Pirates wanted to disable the target ship without destroying it. You want to capture valuable cargo intact, not sink it to the ocean floor. So the strategy was specific. Shoot away the rigging. Pirate vessels carried many cannons for their size, more than merchant ships, though fewer than naval warships. But pirates used cannons differently. Naval combat focused on hull shots, trying to sink enemy ships. Pirates aimed high, targeting masts, rigging, and sails. A ship with damaged rigging can't maneuver or escape. It becomes a helpless target, unable to fight effectively or flee. Chain shot, 2 cannonballs connected by a chain, was devastating against rigging. When fired, the chain shot would spin through the air like a bolus, wrapping around masts and ropes, shredding sails, snapping lines. A few good chain shot hits could cripple a ship's mobility entirely. Once the target was disabled, pirates would close for boarding. This is where the real fighting happened, and it was brutal. Boarding actions required getting the ships touching, either by sailing alongside and using grappling hooks to pull the ships together, or by maneuvering close enough to jump across. Pirates were expert sailors, who could perform these maneuvers even in rough seas. The goal was to get as many pirates on the enemy deck as possible, as quickly as possible. The weapons for boarding were specific. Cutlasses were ideal, short, heavy swords with a curved blade. On a crowded, moving deck, you didn't need reach. You needed a weapon that could hack and slash in close quarters. Cutlasses could cut through rope, wood, and flesh with equal ease. They were robust, didn't require much skill to use effectively, and were devastating in tight spaces. Pistols were backup weapons. Flintlock pistols were single-shot, inaccurate, and unreliable. They'd misfire in damp conditions, which was always on ships. Pirates would load pistols with multiple balls or buckshot, aim at the largest mass of enemies, fire once, then use the pistol as a club or switch to cutlasses. Some pirates carried multiple pistols to get more shots, but reloading during combat was impossible. Boarding axes were common, useful as both weapons and tools. You could fight with them, but you could also chop down doors, cut ropes, break open chests. Utility mattered when you were plundering. Blunderbusses, short, shotgun-like weapons, were devastating. Load them with nails, scrap metal, musket balls, whatever you had, and fire into dense groups. At close range, they'd drop multiple enemies. But they were slow to reload, so you got one shot, then switched to melee weapons. The fighting itself was chaotic. Imagine a wooden deck rolling with ocean swells. Blood makes it slippery. Ropes and debris create obstacles. Everyone's crowded together, fighting desperately. The noise is incredible. Men screaming, weapons clashing, cannons still firing, officers shouting orders. Smoke from gunpowder obscures everything. It's terrifying, confusing, and deadly. Pirates had advantages. They outnumbered merchant crews significantly. They were experienced fighters who'd done this before. They were motivated. This was their livelihood. And they were brutal. Pirates understood that extreme violence in the first few seconds could break enemy morale. A few horrible deaths, a man disemboweled, another with his head split, would make defenders surrender rather than face the same fate. But pirates also had discipline. Despite the chaos, crews had assigned roles. Some would focus on securing the deck, others would go below to secure prisoners and cargo. A few would guard the boarding point to prevent counterattacks. The quartermaster would organize the plunder, ensuring nothing was stolen or overlooked. Pirates were professionals, executing a well-practiced operation. Once control was established, violence stopped. Pirates would secure prisoners, search the ship thoroughly, and evaluate the cargo. Gold and silver were ideal, compact, valuable, easy to divide. Manufactured goods like cloth and tools were good. Bulk cargo like sugar or tobacco was less desirable but still valuable. Food, water, and medical supplies were always taken. Pirates would question the crew. Anyone willing to join would be recruited. Merchant sailors often jumped at the chance. Skilled specialists, carpenters, navigators, surgeons, were especially valued and sometimes forced to join. Brutal officers might be beaten or killed, both as revenge and as warning to other officers in the future. The captured ship itself was a decision. If it was faster or better armed than the pirate ship, they'd transfer to it, making the captured vessel their new flagship. Otherwise, they'd strip it of valuables and either sink it or let it go.
Sinking eliminated evidence and prevented pursuit. Releasing it showed mercy and encouraged future surrenders. Some pirates practiced a particular psychological tactic with officers. Captured captains who'd treated their crews well would be released unharmed, given boats and provisions. Captains who'd been brutal to their crews would be beaten or killed, with pirates making sure surviving crew members could tell the story. This reinforced the narrative that pirates were dispensers of rough justice, punishing bad officers and rewarding good ones. Pirates also gathered intelligence. Captured crews would be questioned about other ships, what was sailing where, what cargoes were worth taking, which ships had strong defenses. This intelligence network made pirates remarkably effective hunters. They knew where valuable targets would be before those targets knew pirates were nearby. The entire operation, from spotting a target to securing plunder, might take only a few hours. Pirates were efficient. Time meant risk. Naval patrols might appear, weather might turn, complications might arise. Get in, overwhelm resistance, take valuables, get out. Speed and efficiency over prolonged engagement. This is what made pirates so effective. They weren't trying to sink ships or win naval battles. They were running heists at sea, using psychological warfare, overwhelming force, and brutal efficiency to steal valuable cargo while minimizing their own casualties. They were criminals using military tactics for economic gain, and they were extremely good at it. Now let's talk about the individuals who became legends, the pirates whose names still resonate 300 years later. Because while piracy was a collective enterprise, certain characters stood out for their audacity, success, and sheer dramatic presence. Let's start with Blackbeard, Edward Teach, the most famous pirate in history, and he earned that fame through brilliant self-promotion and psychological warfare as much as through actual piracy. Blackbeard understood branding before that was a concept. He cultivated an image of demonic terror. He wore his beard long and braided it, tying the braids with colored ribbons. Before battle, he'd light slow-burning fuses under his hat so smoke would curl around his face like an infernal halo. He wore multiple pistols across his chest, 6 or more, making him look like walking artillery. The image was calculated. I am terror incarnate. I am death walking. His flagship, Queen Anne's Revenge, was a captured French slave ship mounting 40 guns, massive firepower for a pirate vessel. He commanded a squadron of 4 ships and roughly 300 men at his peak. Blackbeard blockaded Charleston, South Carolina, capturing ships and holding the city for ransom. He negotiated directly with governors and colonial officials, acting like an independent power. But here's what's interesting. Blackbeard's actual career was brief. He He was only active for about 2 years before his death in 1718. During that time, there's little evidence he ever killed anyone who didn't attack him first. His reputation for cruelty came largely from the image he cultivated, not from documented atrocities. He was a genius at using fear as a weapon, so he rarely had to use actual violence. His death was dramatic. Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the Royal Navy hunted him to Ocracoke Island, North Carolina. The battle was brutal hand-to-hand combat. Blackbeard fought with legendary ferocity, shot 5 times, stabbed over 20 times, still fighting until he finally collapsed and died. Maynard cut off Blackbeard's head and hung it from his ship's bowsprit as a trophy and warning. That severed head became the ultimate symbol of piracy's defeat. Then there's Bartholomew Roberts, Black Bart, the most successful pirate of the Golden Age. Roberts captured over 400 ships in 3 years, an astonishing record. He was methodical, disciplined, and professional. Where other pirates were chaotic drunks, Roberts ran tight ships with strict codes. Roberts had principles. He was a teetotaler who drank tea instead of rum, almost unheard of among pirates. He enforced strict discipline, prohibited gambling and fighting on his ships, and insisted on fair distribution of plunder. His crews were more effective because of this discipline. They operated like naval vessels with better morale and democratic governance. Roberts was also vengeful. The governors of Barbados and Martinique particularly annoyed him, so he created flags specifically threatening them. One flag showed him standing on 2 skulls labeled "A Barbadian's Head" and "A Martiniquean's Head." This wasn't empty threat. He targeted ships from those islands specifically, sometimes torturing and killing crew members as revenge. He died in battle in 1722, shot through the throat by grape shot from a pursuing naval vessel. His crew, following his wishes, threw his body overboard rather than let authorities display it. Roberts disappeared into the sea he'd terrorized. His body never recovered. Charles Vane was different, openly cruel, untrustworthy, and eventually betrayed by his own crew. He was one of the Nassau pirates who refused the king's pardon and continued raiding. But Vane's cruelty and cowardice — he once fled from a French warship which his crew saw as cowardice — led to his crew voting him out as captain. His own quartermaster, Jack Rackham, replaced him after a democratic vote. Vane's career ended pathetically. He was shipwrecked, survived, tried to pass himself off as a legitimate sailor, was recognized, captured, and hanged in Jamaica in 1720. From feared pirate to dead criminal, betrayed by his own crew, and killed by the system he'd defied. Jack Rackham, Calico Jack, named for the colorful calico clothes he wore, is remembered mostly for 2 women on his crew, Anne Bonny and Mary Read. Calico Jack was a decent pirate, but not particularly successful. His fame comes entirely from his association with those 2 remarkable women, and from his distinctive flag, a skull with crossed swords, one of the most iconic pirate flag designs. Now, Anne Bonny and Mary Read, these women shattered every assumption about gender in the pirate world. Both dressed as men and fought as pirates, their gender unknown to most crew members for extended periods. Mary Read had an extraordinary life. Born in England, raised disguised as a boy to claim an inheritance, she joined the military, still disguised as male, fought in continental wars, revealed her gender to marry a soldier, then returned to male disguise after her husband died. She ended up in the Caribbean, joined Calico Jack's crew, and became one of the fiercest fighters on the ship. Anne Bonny was Irish, ran away from her wealthy father,
married a pirate, then left him for Calico Jack. She fought alongside men, disguised as male for battles, but not hiding her gender from the core crew. She was reportedly as fierce in combat as any man, possibly more so. The famous story is that Mary Read and Anne Bonny were among the last fighters standing when Calico Jack's ship was captured. Most of the male crew were too drunk to fight, but these two women held the deck, fighting desperately until overwhelmed. Both were captured, both were tried, and both revealed they were pregnant. A clever survival tactic, since pregnant women weren't executed. Mary Read died in prison, probably from fever. Anne Bonny's fate is unknown. She wasn't executed, probably because her wealthy father intervened. She disappears from the historical record. Some stories say she returned to her father, married respectably, lived a long, quiet life. Others say she continued as a pirate under a new identity. We don't know. She vanished, leaving only legend. These women proved that pirate society was genuinely more egalitarian than civilized society.
They weren't mascots or tokens. They were full members of crews, fighting, voting, receiving equal shares. Their presence shows that pirate ships, for all their violence, were more progressive about gender than anything in Europe or the Americas. Then there's Henry Every, also called Henry Avery, who pulled off possibly the greatest pirate heist in history. In 1695, Every captured the Ganges Sawai, a Mughal ship carrying pilgrims returning from Mecca. The ship carried incredible wealth: gold, silver, jewels, possibly 600,000 pounds sterling, an almost unimaginable fortune. Every's attack was brutal. His crew tortured passengers to reveal hidden wealth, and there were reports of mass rape. The brutality created international crisis. The Mughal emperor threatened to expel the British East India Company from India if the pirates weren't caught and punished. Suddenly, piracy wasn't just economic crime. It was a threat to British imperial interests. Every escaped with his fortune and disappeared. He's one of the few pirates who actually got away with it, retiring wealthy and never caught. His fate remains unknown, though some historians suggest he was cheated by merchants he trusted with his plunder and died poor. Either way, he achieved the pirate dream: get rich and disappear. These individuals became legends not just because of what they did, but because of what they represented. In an age of rigid hierarchy, they rejected authority. In a world of aristocratic privilege, they chose democratic governance. In societies that enforced strict gender and racial boundaries, they created communities where merit mattered more than birth. They were criminals, yes, violent, often cruel, ultimately doomed. But they were also rebels against a system that treated most humans as disposable. Their legend endures because they embodied a dangerous idea: that free people could govern themselves, that authority had to be earned, not inherited, that the systems of their world weren't natural and eternal, but choices that could be rejected. The Golden Age of Piracy couldn't last. European empires were too powerful, too wealthy, too determined. Piracy disrupted trade, cost merchants fortunes, and embarrassed navies. The empires would bring overwhelming force to crush the pirates. And that's exactly what happened. The turning point was economic. By the early 1720s, piracy was costing British merchants an estimated £2 to £4 million annually, an enormous sum. Insurance rates for Caribbean shipping were skyrocketing. Some routes were nearly impossible to sail safely. This wasn't just criminal annoyance. This was threatening the economic foundations of empire. The British response was systematic. They increased naval presence in the Caribbean dramatically. More warships patrolling, dedicated pirate hunters with experienced crews, and crucially, ships fast enough to catch pirate vessels. The Royal Navy began building sloops specifically to hunt pirates, fast, maneuverable vessels that could pursue pirates into shallow waters where larger warships couldn't follow. They also established courts in the colonies specifically for trying pirates. Before, captured pirates had to be transported to England for trial, a lengthy and expensive process. Now, admiralty courts in Jamaica, the Carolinas, and other colonies could try and execute pirates immediately. Justice became swift and brutal. The trials were legally questionable. Many pirates were convicted on thin evidence. Some were clearly innocent sailors forced into piracy. But authorities wanted deterrence more than justice. Every execution sent a message. This is what happens to pirates. The executions were public spectacles designed to terrify. Pirates would be hanged at ports, their bodies left hanging in cages called gibbets as warnings. Some bodies hung for years, slowly decomposing, birds picking at the remains. Walking into port, you'd see these corpses swaying in the wind, a reminder that piracy ended with rot and death. Some famous executions became legendary. Calico Jack Rackham was hanged in Jamaica in 1720. His body was displayed in a gibbet at a point now called Rackham's Cay. Charles Vane was hanged at Gallows Point in Port Royal, his body left to hang as ships passed. William Kidd, hanged in London in 1701, had his body coated in tar and displayed in a gibbet for 20 years as a warning to passing sailors. The gibbeting was deliberate psychological warfare. Authorities wanted pirates to know that even death wouldn't end their humiliation. Your body would rot in public view, an object of horror and mockery. You'd have no proper burial, no peace. For sailors who were often superstitious, this was a fate worse than simple execution. But the British also offered an alternative: the King's pardon. Multiple times, the government offered amnesty, surrender, renounce piracy, and receive forgiveness for past crimes. No prosecution, no execution, just freedom to live as a law-abiding subject. This was brilliant strategy. It divided pirates against each other. Some were tired, wanted to retire with their plunder intact, feared the noose. They took the pardon, settled in colonies, tried to live respectably. Benjamin Hornigold took the pardon and became a pirate hunter working for the British. Henry Jennings took the pardon and became a Jamaican plantation owner. Others saw the pardon as betrayal. True pirates rejected authority completely. Surrendering to the king meant admitting that royal authority was legitimate, that their rebellion was over. So hardcore pirates like Blackbeard, Bartholomew Roberts, and Charles Vane refused, continuing their careers knowing they were marked for death. The pardons created paranoia. Who had secretly negotiated with authorities? Who might betray the crew for amnesty? Trust between pirates eroded. Some crews splintered, captains and quartermasters arguing about whether to surrender. The unity that made pirates effective dissolved. Betrayal became common. Pirates would inform on former comrades to secure their own pardons or collect bounties. The pirate community that had been bound by codes and mutual loyalty fell apart as men saved themselves at others' expense. Former friends would testify against each other in court, providing evidence that sent old crewmates to the gallows. The most famous betrayal involved Blackbeard.
Some historians suggest that North Carolina Governor Charles Eden was secretly protecting Blackbeard in exchange for a share of plunder. When Virginia's Governor Spotswood sent Lieutenant Maynard to kill Blackbeard, it was partly to eliminate a pirate and partly to expose Eden's corruption. Piracy had become entangled with colonial politics in complex ways. Captured pirate havens systematically. Nassau fell to Woodes Rogers in 1718. Other havens in Madagascar, the West African coast, and scattered Caribbean islands were raided and destroyed. Pirates were losing their safe spaces, the places they could rest, repair ships, and spend plunder. Being constantly hunted with nowhere to hide made piracy unsustainable. The economic calculations changed too. As naval presence increased, successful raids became rarer. The risk of capture rose while the rewards decreased. Many merchant ships started sailing in convoys with naval escorts, making them nearly impossible to attack. The easy pickings that had made piracy profitable disappeared. By 1725, the Golden Age was essentially over. Most famous pirates were dead or pardoned. The Pirate Republic of Nassau was a British colony. Naval patrols controlled the Caribbean. Trade resumed normal levels. The brief period when pirates could operate with impunity was finished. Some pirates tried to continue. A few went to the Indian Ocean or West Africa, finding less patrolled waters. But even there,
European powers were extending control. The global reach of empire meant there was nowhere truly safe. Pirates became increasingly marginalized, operating on the fringes with diminishing success. The last major pirate of the Golden Age was probably Bartholomew Roberts, killed in 1722. After his death, organized piracy in the Caribbean essentially ceased. There would still be pirates. There are still pirates today in Somalia and Southeast Asia. But the era of pirate republics, democratic crews, and serious threats to imperial trade was over. Why did it end? Overwhelming force. The empires brought more ships, more soldiers, more resources than pirates could match. But also economics. As piracy became less profitable and more dangerous, rational people chose other options. And division. Pardons and betrayal destroyed the community that had made pirates strong. The Golden Age lasted barely 30 years, from roughly 1690 to 1725, with the peak from 1715 to 1725. In historical terms, it was barely a moment. But in that moment, pirates created something remarkable. A challenge to empire, an experiment in democracy, a refuge for those society had discarded. It couldn't last, but it happened. And we remember it because it represented something people still desire. Freedom from tyranny, equality among people, the courage to reject unjust systems, even at terrible cost. Let's talk about something that doesn't get enough attention in pirate stories. Pirates were practicing democracy decades before democratic revolutions transformed Europe and America. The pirate ship was possibly the most democratic institution in the 18th century Atlantic world. And understanding this changes how we see the entire era. Think about the world in 1715. Most countries were absolute monarchies. Kings ruled by divine right. God supposedly chose them to rule, and questioning royal authority was questioning God. In Britain, Parliament existed, but was dominated by nobility and wealthy landowners. France was an absolute monarchy under Louis XIV, who supposedly said, "L'État, c'est moi." I am the state. Spain, Portugal, the Netherlands, all ruled by hereditary monarchs and aristocrats. The American and French revolutions, which would establish democratic governments, wouldn't happen until 1776
and 1789, respectively. Enlightenment philosophers were starting to discuss democracy theoretically, but almost nowhere was actually practicing it. Except on pirate ships. Pirates elected their captains by majority vote. This wasn't ceremonial. It was real power flowing from the crew to the leadership. If the captain failed, showed cowardice, made bad decisions, acted tyrannically, the crew could vote him out immediately. Some captains were deposed multiple times. Charles Vane was famously voted out and replaced by Jack Rackham after his crew decided he'd shown cowardice. The captain's authority was limited to combat situations. During battle, the captain commanded and everyone obeyed. Lives depended on quick decisions and unified action. But outside of combat, the captain had no more authority than any other crew member. He couldn't order people around, couldn't make unilateral decisions, couldn't claim special privileges. The quartermaster, elected separately, served as a check on the captain's power. He represented the crew's interests, managed food distribution, oversaw plunder division, and resolved disputes. If the captain and quartermaster disagreed, the issue went to a crew vote. This separation of powers prevented any one person from dominating. Major decisions required crew votes: where to sail, whether to attack a target, whether to accept new crew members, how to punish violations of the code, all decided democratically. Every man's vote counted equally. Former slaves voted alongside former officers. Illiterate sailors voted alongside educated navigators. This was direct democracy in action. Compare this to naval or merchant ships. Captains had absolute authority. They could beat, imprison, or execute sailors at will. No appeals, no votes, no checks on their power. Captains were appointed by owners or admirals, not chosen by crews. The hierarchy was rigid and enforced through violence. Or compare it to land-based societies. In Europe, your social status was determined by birth. Nobles were nobles because their parents were nobles. Commoners couldn't become nobles regardless of merit. The class system was enforced by law, custom, and religion. Social mobility barely existed. On pirate ships, authority came from merit and consent, not birth or appointment. A brilliant navigator from a poor background could become captain if the crew valued his skills. A nobleman who proved incompetent would be demoted or voted out. Your past didn't matter, only your contribution to the collective enterprise. This extended to racial equality. In the 18th century Atlantic world, racism was absolute. Slavery was legal and widespread. Racial hierarchies were enforced by law. Black people were considered property, not humans with rights. Mixed-race relationships were illegal in many places. The very idea of racial equality was unthinkable to most white people. But pirate crews were integrated. Black pirates, many former slaves, served alongside white pirates as equals. They received equal shares of plunder, had equal votes in decisions, could be elected to positions of authority. Some black pirates became captains or quartermasters, commanding racially mixed crews. This wasn't idealism. This was pragmatic necessity. When you're outlaws hunted by every empire, you need every capable person. Racism is a luxury pirates couldn't afford. A black sailor who knew navigation was more valuable than a white sailor who didn't. Skills mattered. Loyalty mattered. Your skin color didn't. But the result was revolutionary. Pirate ships became possibly the only place in the Atlantic world where racial equality was practiced, not just discussed. Former slaves could achieve positions of authority over white crew members. This was unthinkable anywhere else. There are documented cases of black pirate captains. Black Caesar, Black Sam, and others commanded crews. The most famous might be Hendrik Quintor, a black pirate who commanded a ship off the West African coast. These men went from being property to being leaders through merit and democratic consent. Women, as we've discussed, also found more opportunity on pirate ships than anywhere else. Anne Bonny and Mary Read fought as equals, received equal shares, participated in democratic decisions. This was still a patriarchal world. There weren't many women pirates, and they usually disguised themselves as men. But the opportunities that existed were greater than in civilized society. The economic democracy was also radical. When plunder was captured, it was divided according to the agreed-upon code. The captain got more, but only modestly more, maybe twice a common sailor's share. The quartermaster, boatswain, and other officers got slightly more, but the bulk went to common sailors who did the actual fighting. Compare this to merchant shipping. Captains and owners took 90% or more of profits. Sailors got subsistence wages. Or compare it to land-based economies where nobles controlled vast wealth while peasants starved. Pirate ships practiced wealth distribution that wouldn't be seriously discussed in political philosophy for another century. The compensation for injuries was remarkably progressive. This was the first disability insurance in history. Lose a leg in battle? You get 800 pieces of 8 from the common fund. Lose an arm? 600 pieces of 8. Lesser injuries received proportionate compensation. This ensured that men who sacrificed their bodies for the crew would be taken care of. In the legitimate world, injured sailors got nothing. Crippled by an accident on a merchant ship? Too bad. You're thrown off at the next port with no compensation.
Lose a leg fighting for the Royal Navy. Maybe a small pension if you're lucky, probably nothing. Pirate disability compensation was more generous and reliable than anything legitimate institutions offered. The Pirate Code also protected individual rights. The prohibition on striking another crew member on ship meant you couldn't be beaten without consequence. Disputes were resolved through trials or duels on shore, not through violence that endangered the ship. This was rule of law, however rough, protecting individuals from arbitrary violence. These weren't abstract principles. These were functional systems that governed daily life. Pirates lived under these rules, enforced them, and modified them through democratic process. They didn't have political philosophers explaining why democracy was good. They had practical systems that worked. Some historians argue that pirates influenced later democratic movements. Sailors who had experienced pirate democracy returned to legitimate society with ideas about equality, voting rights, and fair treatment. These ideas may have spread into colonial society, influencing the democratic currents that would eventually produce the American Revolution. This is speculative, but consider. Many Americans in 1776 had maritime experience. They'd seen or heard about pirate crews governing themselves democratically. The ideas weren't strange to them. The notion that authority should come from consent, that leaders should be elected, that people deserved fair treatment. Pirates had practiced all of this decades earlier. Pirates were also proto-labor organizers. Mutinies were essentially strikes, workers seizing the means of production and running enterprises themselves. The pirate codes were labor contracts written by workers, not imposed by owners. The emphasis on fair compensation, democratic governance, and protection from abuse, these are labor movement principles appearing on pirate ships generations before labor movements emerged on land. This doesn't make pirates heroes. They were still violent criminals who stole, killed, and caused tremendous suffering. But it complicates the simple narrative of pirates as villains.
They were criminals, yes, but they were also rebels, creating surprisingly progressive societies in the process of their rebellion. The pirate experiment in democracy was limited, flawed, and ultimately crushed by empire. But it proved something important. Ordinary people, including those society dismissed as worthless, could govern themselves effectively. Democracy could work outside the theoretical writings of philosophers. Equality was practical, not just idealistic. When the last pirate crews were hunted down and hanged, they took their democratic societies with them. But the ideas survived. The notion that authority must be earned, that people deserve fair treatment, that birth doesn't determine worth. These ideas would resurface in revolutions and labor movements. Pirates planted seeds that would grow in later soil. Let's talk about how pirate history became pirate mythology, because the legends we believe about pirates are often more fiction than fact. The transformation from historical criminals to romantic anti-heroes tells us as much about ourselves as about the pirates. The romanticization began almost immediately. Even during the Golden Age, pirates captured public imagination in ways other criminals didn't. Newspapers published sensationalized accounts of pirate raids, often exaggerating violence and drama. The public was horrified, but also fascinated. Pirates represented freedom, adventure, and rebellion. Dangerous ideas, but appealing ones. The first major work of pirate fiction was A General History of the Pirates, published in 1724, possibly written by Daniel Defoe, though this is disputed. This book presented itself as factual history, but included significant embellishments, invented dialogue, and outright fiction. Many of our historical facts about pirates come from this book, even though much of it was invented or exaggerated for entertainment. This book established many pirate tropes we still believe. Pirates making captives walk the plank, pirates burying treasure and creating cryptic maps, pirates having parrots on their shoulders. Most of this is fiction or extreme exaggeration. Walking the plank was exceptionally rare. If pirates wanted to kill someone, they'd just throw them overboard or shoot them. Buried treasure is mostly myth. Pirates spent their money quickly rather than saving it. Parrots were possible souvenirs from tropical raids, but weren't standard pirate equipment. The book was wildly popular, going through multiple editions. It shaped how subsequent generations understood pirates. Even today, most pirate facts trace back to this 1724 book of questionable accuracy. The 19th century intensified the Romanticism. Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island, published in 1883, created the pirate we imagine. Long John Silver with his parrot, treasure maps, desert islands, the whole adventure. This novel, written for children, transformed pirates from brutal criminals into romantic adventurers. Treasure Island gave us many pirate tropes. The X marking treasure on maps. The idea of pirates saying "Arr," which actually comes from movies much later. The one-legged pirate with a crutch. The cheerful singing of sea shanties. Pirates as clever rogues rather than desperate criminals. This fictional pirate became more real in cultural memory than actual pirates ever were. J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan, 1904, gave us Captain Hook, a refined, educated pirate who was more comic villain than genuine threat. Again, pirates became entertainment for children, further divorced from the violent reality. Hollywood completed the transformation. Errol Flynn's Captain Blood
1935, and subsequent pirate films portrayed pirates as swashbuckling heroes fighting oppression and getting the girl. These movies were about adventure and romance, not historical reality. They established visual iconography, the tricorn hats, the elaborate coats, the perfectly choreographed sword fights, that has nothing to do with how real pirates looked or fought. The Disney Pirates of the Caribbean franchise took this even further. Jack Sparrow is drunk, funny, charming, and fundamentally harmless. Real pirates would have killed him or voted him out immediately. The movies are entertaining, but create a pirate image completely detached from history. What's fascinating is how persistent these myths are. People know pirates buried treasure, even though there's almost no historical evidence for this. People know pirates made people walk planks, even though it was extremely rare. People imagine pirates as romantic freedom fighters, even though they were violent criminals. Why do we romanticize pirates? Partly it's the passage of time. Enough distance makes anyone seem less threatening. But more importantly, pirates represent something we desire: freedom from authority, adventure, living by our own rules. In an increasingly regulated world, pirates symbolize rebellion and independence. Pirates also represent a kind of working-class heroism. They were common sailors who rejected exploitation and created more equitable societies. In an era of increasing economic inequality, that narrative is appealing. Pirates become symbols of resistance against the powerful, even though historical reality was more complicated. The treasure hunting mythology is particularly persistent. Companies still search for pirate treasure, spending millions on expeditions based on dubious maps and legends. A few genuine discoveries, like the Widder Galley, a pirate ship found off Cape Cod, feed the fantasy that more treasure is out there.
But the reality is that pirates spent money as fast as they got it. The idea of retiring wealthy after finding buried treasure was as much a fantasy then as now. The desert island mythology is also powerful. We imagine Robinson Crusoe scenarios, pirates marooning people on pristine beaches. Reality was harsher. Marooning meant being left on a barren sandbar or uninhabited island with minimal supplies, effectively a death sentence. The marooned would die of thirst, starvation, or exposure. It wasn't an adventure. It was execution. Even our understanding of pirate appearance is fictionalized. We imagine pirates with eye patches, hook hands, and peg legs. While injuries were common, most pirates with such disabilities would have retired. You can't effectively fight or work a ship if you're seriously disabled. The disability insurance existed partly because serious injuries meant you couldn't continue pirating. Pirate clothing in popular imagination, the elaborate coats, the tricorn hats, the boots, comes from 19th and 20th century costume designers, not historical reality. Real pirates wore practical sailor clothes, often stolen from captured ships. They didn't have distinctive pirate uniforms. They looked like sailors because they were sailors who turned criminal. The pirate accent we all know, the exaggerated "arr" and "matey," was invented by actor Robert Newton in the 1950 film Treasure Island. He played Long John Silver with an exaggerated West Country English accent, and it became the standard pirate voice. Real pirates spoke in whatever accent their origin gave them: English, Scottish, Irish, French, Spanish, African languages, etc. Even the Jolly Roger mythology is exaggerated. While black flags with skulls were real, not all pirates used them. Some used plain red flags. Some used national flags as deception. The skull and crossbones became associated with pirates partly through fiction, which then fed back into historical understanding. The songs we associate with pirates, 15 men on a dead man's chest, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum, were invented for Treasure Island or other fiction. Real sea shanties existed, but they were work songs for coordinating labor, not drinking anthems about pirate life. What's the harm in these myths? They're entertaining, they make good stories, but they obscure reality. Real pirates were desperate men living brutal lives in terrible conditions, dying young from disease or violence. The democracy and equality on pirate ships was born from necessity, not enlightened ideals. The freedom was real, but came with constant danger and near-certain death. Romanticizing pirates risks obscuring their genuine historical significance. Pirates did create remarkably democratic societies. They did practice racial equality unprecedented for their time. They did resist brutal systems of labor exploitation. These real achievements get buried under myths about buried treasure and desert islands. The myths also obscure the victims. Piracy caused tremendous suffering. Captured sailors were sometimes killed. Passengers on ships were traumatized. Some pirates practiced torture to reveal hidden wealth. The economic disruption hurt trade and raised prices. Real people suffered real harm from piracy, but our myths make it seem like harmless adventure. Yet the myths serve a purpose. They allow us to explore ideas about freedom, rebellion, and alternative societies without the moral complexity of reality. Fictional pirates can be heroes because they're not real. We can enjoy the fantasy of living free while knowing we'd never actually want to face a real pirate. The transformation from history to legend is nearly complete. When people say pirate, they think of Jack Sparrow or Long John Silver, not Edward Teach or Bartholomew Roberts. The fictional pirates have displaced the real ones in cultural memory. And that's probably okay. The fiction is more entertaining, if less true. But occasionally, it's worth remembering the reality behind the romance. Real pirates were products of brutal systems, desperate men making desperate choices, criminals and rebels and democratic experimenters all at once. They were more interesting than the myths, if less comforting. The real history of piracy tells us about labor, freedom, democracy, violence, and empire. The myths tell us about what we wish pirates had been. Both have their place. The myths entertain. The history teaches. Understanding the difference between them makes both more valuable. So here we are, at the end of the pirate story. The Golden Age burned brightly for barely 30 years before empires crushed it. The pirate republic of Nassau fell. The famous captains died on gallows or in battle. The democratic crews were scattered or hanged. The black flag stopped flying over Caribbean seas. By 1730, organized piracy was essentially finished. But what did it all mean? What's the legacy of these brutal, democratic, desperate outlaws? First, the immediate impact. Piracy fundamentally shaped the development of British imperialism. The need to combat pirates drove naval expansion. Britain built more ships, established more bases, extended more control over Caribbean waters. The pirate threat justified aggressive imperial policies that might otherwise have faced more resistance. The pirate haven of Nassau becoming a British colony was symbolically important. It proved that no space existed outside imperial control. There were no blank spots on the map, no places beyond the empire's reach. Pirates had tried to create autonomous societies, and empires had crushed them. The lesson was clear: submit or die. The increased naval presence that ended piracy didn't disappear after pirates were defeated. Those ships, those bases, that extended control, all became permanent infrastructure of empire. In fighting pirates, Britain created the military capability to dominate the Atlantic and Caribbean.
This would prove crucial in later conflicts with France and Spain.
Economically, ending piracy allowed trade to flourish. Insurance rates dropped, shipping became safer and more profitable. The Caribbean plantation economy, built on slavery, expanded dramatically after pirate threats ended. The dark irony is that many pirates, including former slaves, had disrupted the slave trade, and their elimination allowed slavery to intensify. But pirates left other legacies less obvious than imperial expansion. The pirate codes, those democratic documents created by outlaws, influenced later political thought. Some historians argue that pirate practices of elected leadership, limited authority, and constitutional governance influenced American revolutionary thinking. Many colonists had maritime experience and knew about pirate democracy. The ideas weren't foreign to them. This is speculative, but intriguing. The American Revolution emphasized consent of the governed, elected representatives, written constitutions limiting government power, and checks and balances. All principles pirates had practiced decades earlier. Did pirates directly influence the Founding Fathers? Probably not through reading pirate codes, but through maritime culture, through sailors' stories, through practical examples of alternative governance? Possibly. The pirate emphasis on racial equality was remarkable for its time and place. While pirate crews weren't free of racism, we shouldn't romanticize them. They practiced a level of racial integration that mainstream society wouldn't approach for 200 years. Former slaves could become captains. Black and white sailors worked as equals, shared plunder equally, voted together. This proved racial equality was possible, practical, and functional. The proto-labor movement aspects of piracy also matter. Pirates were workers seizing control from exploitative owners. They created work conditions vastly superior to merchant ships. They demanded fair compensation, democratic input, and protection from abuse. These are labor movement principles, appearing generations before organized labor movements emerged. The disability compensation that pirates pioneered, the world's first such system, eventually influenced maritime law. The concept that workers injured on the job deserve compensation didn't originate with pirates, but pirate codification of it provided a working model. Modern workers' compensation systems can trace spiritual, if not direct, ancestry to pirate codes. The cultural legacy is enormous. Pirates have been romanticized into symbols of freedom and rebellion. They appear in literature, film, video games, theme parks. Talk like a pirate day is a thing. Pirate aesthetics are everywhere. The black flag with skull and crossbones is instantly recognizable worldwide. Pirates have become cultural icons, representing adventure, independence, and rebellion against authority. This romanticization obscures reality, but serves a purpose. Pirates symbolize the possibility of living outside oppressive systems, of creating alternative societies, of choosing freedom over security. In an age of increasing surveillance, regulation, and control, pirates represent an impossible fantasy of complete autonomy. We know it's not real, but the dream is appealing. For marginalized people, pirates offer a different appeal. Pirates were society's rejects, failed sailors, escaped slaves, poor men with no prospects, who created their own society based on merit rather than birth. This story resonates with anyone who's been told they don't matter. that their background determines their destiny. Pirates proved that outcasts could build something significant. The historical reality, stripped of romance, offers important lessons. First, systems that treat people as disposable create desperate enemies. Merchant marine brutality directly created piracy. If you enslave and abuse workers, some will rebel, and their rebellion will be violent.
This lesson applies beyond pirates. Every revolution, every labor struggle, every social movement has roots in systems that pushed people beyond endurance. Second, democracy and equality aren't luxuries. They're practical necessities for cohesive groups. Pirates adopted democratic governance not from idealism, but from pragmatism. They needed every man's full commitment, which required fair treatment and voice in decisions. Organizations that want loyalty and dedication must give respect and equality in return. Third, alternative societies are possible. Pirates created functioning democracies with racial equality and fair economic distribution in the 18th century. This proves such societies can work. The pirate version was flawed, violent, and ultimately unsustainable, but it existed, which means alternatives to unjust systems are possible, not just theoretical. Fourth, empire has limits. For a brief period, pirates successfully resisted the most powerful empires on Earth. They created spaces beyond imperial control, governed themselves, and threatened imperial economic interests. They were eventually crushed, yes, but they proved that empire isn't invincible, that resistance is possible, that people can refuse to submit. Fifth, freedom has costs. Pirates chose freedom over security and paid terrible prices. Most died young, killed by disease, battle, or hanging. The freedom was real, but brief. This isn't an argument against seeking freedom. It's acknowledgement that freedom often costs more than we initially realize. Choosing it means accepting the price. Sixth, we remember rebels, even defeated ones. The empires that crushed pirates are less remembered than the pirates themselves. We remember Blackbeard more than the governors who hunted him. We remember Nassau's pirate republic more than its later history as a British colony. Rebellion, even failed rebellion, echoes through history in ways conformity doesn't. And finally, the stories we tell matter. Historical pirates were violent criminals, but we've transformed them into symbols of freedom and adventure. This transformation says something about human needs and desires. We need stories about rebellion, about alternative possibilities, about refusing unjust systems. Pirates provide those stories, even if the reality was darker than the myth. So what should we take from the Golden Age of Piracy? Not romance, but reality. Pirates were products of brutal systems, desperate men making desperate choices. They created surprisingly democratic societies while practicing violence. They resisted empire while enriching themselves through theft. They were criminals and rebels, victims and victimizers, progressive and brutal, all at once. They proved that alternative societies could exist, that democracy worked, that racial and economic equality were practical. They also proved that violence begets violence, that rebellion against empire is dangerous, that freedom without security is often short-lived. The pirates are gone, hanged or drowned or lost to time. The Jolly Roger doesn't fly over the Caribbean anymore. The democratic crews are dust. Nassau is a tourist destination, not a pirate republic. The Golden Age ended in blood and gibbets, with corpses swinging as warnings to others. But the memory remains. The black flag still symbolizes rebellion. The pirate code still represents alternative governance. The stories still inspire dreams of freedom and adventure. The legacy is complicated, dark, inspiring, and cautionary all at once. As you drift toward sleep, think about those desperate sailors choosing freedom over slavery. Think about democratic assemblies on rolling decks. Think about black flags rising against empire. Think about imperfect rebels creating imperfect societies that nonetheless challenged everything their world took for granted. The pirates were doomed from the start, but they sailed anyway, raised their black flags, elected their captains, shared their plunder, and died free. That's worth remembering. That's worth the stories we tell. Sleep well, knowing that humans have always resisted injustice, always sought freedom, always created alternatives to oppression, even when doomed. The pirate story isn't just history. It's a reminder that resistance is possible, that freedom is worth fighting for, that the systems that seem eternal can be challenged. The sea keeps their secrets now. The ships are wrecks. The treasure is found or lost forever. The pirates are 3 centuries dead. But the legend lives. And sometimes, in stories told around modern fires, you can still hear the echo of old songs, smell the salt air and rum, see black flags against blue Caribbean skies, and remember when outlaws ruled the waves and freedom had a terrible, wonderful price. Good night, and remember the pirates.